Welcome to my cardboard hoard. We'll just cover that up with my chair. Ta-da! Today we are once again working in the prompt book. There are 95 prompts in here, and currently we are on prompt number... Today's prompt is a collab with Sean from Dolphin Magic Pro, and I allowed him to pick which prompt we are going to be working on, and he picked popcorn. This actually ended up being a pretty difficult prompt. Every idea I came up with, I did a little search on YouTube, and there was always another video that popped up, another really well done video that was my exact same idea. So I decided to try and think outside of the box. So I went from popcorn to wallpaper somehow. I don't know how that happened, but I arrived at I arrived at wallpaper. And Sean actually did something really unexpected as well, so make sure that after you watch my video, you go over to his channel. I will put the link to his video in the description box below so you can check it out. In this video, you're going to find some hand painting and then some computer work and then some miniature making at the end. It's a little bit of everything. I'll put all the timestamps in the description box below, but without further ado, let's get started. We're going to start this portion of the video out with some nice, relaxing watercolor painting. I'm using my water brush pens, some watercolor paper that I've cut into specific sizes so that I don't make my paintings too big or too small. I am also using my watercolor set, but I'm only going to be pulling out a few of the colors. This is going to help me keep a clear color plan throughout this entire design process. If I have access to all of the colors, it may end up that not all of my watercolor drawings or paintings end up looking like they belong together. If I limit my colors, they end up looking more like they're part of one set. If you want to follow along with this video, you definitely don't have to paint your own images. I am doing this because I'm using these images in a monetized video and I want to provide this wallpaper to you for free, and therefore I need to use my own images so I'm not infringing on the copyright rights of anybody else. So I just decided to go ahead and make my own images. But if you want to follow along and you're not using it for monetary gain, you can pretty much use any images you find and put them together in your design. I'm of course starting with popcorn. I went through some images I found online and just kind of looked at a bunch of different pictures of gourmet popcorn or any kind of popcorn and found one that I really liked where it was kind of tipped over, and so this is my interpretation of that. And I'm using reds, and then I decided I wanted to use, later on I decide I want to use some blues. So my main colors that I picked out were reds, blues, and then a brown, a black, and a white. And typically you won't see a lot of the white. What I do is I use it to mix into my other watercolors to make a slightly lighter shade. Here's where I decide to add in some of that blue. Some of the images are going to have more blue than red. Some of them are going to have more red than blue. In the end, I hope it kind of balances out, but I won't really know until I have all the images complete and together. Here I'm adding some of that blue into the shadows of the popcorn, and I did add a few lines on the bucket which got cut off on my footage. Here's an example of where I'm using a little bit more blue in another design. I'm doing a cake slice with the frosting being blue, and then a strawberry is going to bring in some of that red. And I was able to get some type of green because I could mix the yellowy brown with some of the blue. Yeah, yellow plus blue makes green. There we go. And I was able to get some green for the strawberry leaves. Ice cream was a really fun one to work on because ice cream can be just all sorts of colors, but I ended up using the blue for the glass, and that was really fun to try and figure out how to watercolor. The pretzels ended up not being my favorite. I still use them in the wallpaper, but I wanted to add in some more snack type desserts because popcorn really isn't a dessert. I'm trying to stay in like the sweet tooth snack area, At least that's what I had in my head at the time I was going for this. And I'm not quite sure why I put an apple slice on top of a cherry pie. I guess because I wanted there to be red for the cherries, but the apple slice maybe is a little ode to my favorite pie, which is apple pie. But the inside of apple pie really isn't that pretty, so went with cherry instead. And finally, I finished up with some macaron cookies and a donut. So here are all my finished watercolor paintings of the individual foods. I want to keep it an even number because I feel like that would be easier to create the design with. And I'm taking individual pictures of each one with my phone. If you have a scanner, that would work too. I'm just trying to make sure I don't get any shadow on the face of the paper while I'm taking a picture. After I took the pictures, I felt like a few of them looked washed out, which can kind of happen with watercolor because there aren't really defined lines. So I went back with a Sharpie and a white Jelly Roll pen. The Sharpie did a few outlines around the outsides, and I think when I shrink things down, this will help really define the images a little bit more. And I'm using the white Jelly Roll pen to add some highlights. I don't really need it that much on the macarons, but on the berries that have fallen around the muffin, and then especially on the cherry pie, I think it will really help bring out the texture or really like the gooiness of the pie. After I was finished with the pen work, I went ahead and took pictures of them all again, and now I have two options, either outlined or not outlined, when I start creating my wallpaper. For the computer part of this project, I am going to be using Photoshop, but this isn't actually going to be a Photoshop focused tutorial. There are so many other programs that you can do the same exact steps in, so I'm going to keep the steps pretty general, and then you can choose whichever program you feel more comfortable in. There are a few things you're going to want to make sure that your computer program that you're using can do. You want to make sure that you can set the DPI, that's the dots per inch. That's going to be very important. You want to make sure that it can make simple lines and shapes like lines and circles and rectangles. It's going to be pretty important that you can use layers in this program because you're going to want to be able to move your shapes and pictures around to create your wallpaper. These next two things are not necessary, but it would be really helpful if whatever program you're using has a grid that you can turn on and see while you're working, and also if it has a color selector, which means that you can click on a spot on your picture and it will take that color and you can use it somewhere else in your picture. So let's get working on our design. The first thing I'm going to do is open up each one of the pictures I took of my paintings, and I'm going to start working on the white balance, which means I'm changing the background so it is as white as possible. Photoshop has a white balance tool, but you can also play around with the brightness, and you just want to get it nice and bright, and you want to do each picture exactly the same so you end up with the same reds and blues and browns just so that they look all cohesive. And then I'm going to crop each one, so I'm cropping out the background with my hand and my work mat so that I have just the images themselves. The next thing I'm going to do is go in and I'm going to clean up each one. The process of watercoloring can be messy. I can accidentally go over the line where I don't want to, but it makes it really easy in a computer program to go in and clean those things up. I'm not getting too crazy with it because I still want it to have the hand-painted, hand-drawn feel. I'm really just taking anything that was obviously a mistake out of the painting. There's still going to be a few places where it goes over the line or is a little smudgy, and that's okay. After I've done all my edits to my original pictures, I'm going to open up a new file, and this is where it becomes extremely important that you can set your DPI. I often see when people try to print things miniature, it's because they don't have a high DPI that things don't always look good. If I know that I'm going to be making a file that will be printed in miniature, I make sure that my DPI is set at least 600 DPI. That means 600 dots per inch, and that is a much better quality than 100 dots per inch. That just means more detail will be added per inch of the print. I've copy and pasted all of my pictures into this new file, and now that they're together, I could kind of see that my sprinkles weren't as bright and red as the other pieces, and so I'm just going to go in and fiddle with some of the colors to make sure that they look as cohesive as a group as possible. So I don't know if you can tell, but I painted over the sprinkles. I just selected some red that I really liked in the file and painted over the sprinkles a little bit. Now that everything's correct and how I like it, I can shrink them down. I'm going to start putting them into circles. This was kind of my lazy way of not having to cut all the way around each individual piece that I had painted. Because I'm putting it in a white circle and it has a white background, all I have to do is make sure it's the right size and then crop out anything outside of the circle, and then I have my foods all in individual circles, and those circles will be worked into a design in the wallpaper. Now I'm just putting all of my layers together so the circles and the foods are connected and they are ready to go. They are just one piece, the circle and the food, and I don't have to worry about them coming apart. Now I'm making them even smaller. I hesitate going small right away because I want to make sure everything is looking good while it's large and while I can see it really well. But when I'm going smaller, I'm checking against the ruler that's at the top of my Photoshop page, and I don't want them to be a foot across in real life, so I'm making them slightly smaller than 1 inch across. Here is where having a grid is going to be extremely helpful. I'm trying to figure out how far apart I want each of the circles, and by having the grid I can lay them out, play around with them, and know that they are all evenly spaced once I find a look that I like. Then I'm multiplying them and moving them across the page. And by doing this, I realized I had all the pies in a row, all the cakes in the row, and so that didn't really work for me. Once I got to the end of this, I was like, oh, I want it to be a little bit more varied. I think when I look at a wallpaper, it's kind of a challenge to try and find the pattern sometimes. And so I decided instead to duplicate them but at an angle, and this kind of varies the different snacks that you will see along the line a little bit more. And then it almost became a puzzle of me trying to figure out which pieces go into the corner once I had gotten everything in place. But I end up liking how this came out, and it wasn't too hard, but the grid really helped. You can do this without a grid, or you can draw your own grid if your program doesn't have a built-in grid, but I do think it helped out a lot, and I was able to avoid some frustration with my spacing and making sure everything was in place. Once I was happy with everything and rechecked my pattern several times because I wasn't quite sure of myself, I merged all of those layers together because while I was working on the stripes I want to put it in the background, I didn't want any of my circles going out of the spot where I wanted them to be. So once they were connected, I could move them around and I didn't have to worry about it. Even though I did put them back on the grid, now I know none of my circles are going to go missing. To create the stripes, I'm just using the rectangle tool, and I used my color selector tool to pick a red out of one of the little snacks. I think I got it out of the cherry pie maybe, and it ended up being a really bright color, which is okay to start with. I'm not too worried about the colors right now. I will adjust them a little bit down the line, but I want to start putting rectangles and creating some kind of pattern. Since my main two colors that I chose to create the snacks with were red and blue, I decided my two main stripe colors would be red and blue as well. I just alternated them behind rows of the circles. The next color I decided to choose was one of the cream colors that was kind of the pie crust or muffin color, and I went around and selected a few different spots on different paintings until I liked the type of cream that I got out of my color selector. I'm going to put that on the left side of each one of my large stripes. My large stripes are about a 1/2 inch wide, and my skinnier stripes are going to be a 1/4 inch wide. The last stripe color that I chose was gray. I did not pick this out of any of the pictures. I couldn't find another color in the pictures that I really wanted to be represented, but gray is always a great go-to. And so I added gray, and these are all going to be on the right side of the thick lines. And I'm going to add those on each one. Just like I did for the circle layer, once I finish the stripe layer, I am going to connect all of these by merging the layers so that none of them move. Especially when you're working on something so complicated, it's nice to make sure you know that all your pieces are staying in one place. So now I have a circle layer and I have a stripe layer. Now that my stripes are all connected, I can play a little bit with the color. Right now I feel like they're a little bit too bright and in my face, so I'm going to desaturate them a little bit, and I think I play with the brightness as well. And I will continue to do this as I adjust and figure out what I think is a good balance between the pictures on the circles and the stripes behind the circles. I'm now adding a new layer because I want to add some pinstripes just to continue the detail in this pattern. And anytime I'm adding something new to my pattern, I want to add a new layer so I can easily take it away if I don't like it. I made the pinstripes by using the pencil tool, and so they just all ended up on one layer. I don't have to combine them later. They're already combined, and because of that I can start playing around with the levels, and I think I just mess with the opacity on this, and then I'm ready to print. I'm saving it as a JPEG with the highest quality, and then I'm going to be printing it on cardstock. So here it is. I have first look at it coming out of the printer, and immediately I knew that I did not like the black stripes on the wallpaper. I felt like it really took away from the circles with the images inside of it, which are supposed to be the stars of the wallpaper. So I decided to go back into my program and take out all of the black lines. And so this is where it's helpful to have different layers, because I didn't have to completely redo everything. I had a stripe layer, I had my circle layer, and then I had my pinstripe layer, and I could just go in with an eraser and take the black lines out that I didn't want anymore. I decided to replace those black lines with white lines, so now every single pinstripe is a white line, and then I was able to reprint it. Here's the comparison of the original and the updated. I think it just really kind of helps with the flow of the white circles, and it just keeps it a little bit more subdued. The other one's a little bit more in your face, which is totally fine, but I wanted something a little bit softer to go with the tone of the watercolor paintings. I did decide to try and spray these papers with a matte coating. I have heard people mention that if you spray your wallpaper before you put it onto the wall, it won't warp or bubble, and so I decided to try it out. Honestly, I don't think it made that big of a difference. It might make a bigger difference if you're using plain computer paper, but with the cardstock, I find that I don't really get that many bubbles anyway, so it was a good experiment, but I don't know if I'll do it every time. I also decided to spray it on foam board, which was going to be my wall, and that ended up not going well. And so don't put matte spray on your foam board. I thought maybe if both surfaces had a sealant on it before I put it together, that would work, but it didn't, so don't do that on the foam board. I'm going to use the other side to attach my wallpaper to, just to see a sample of it attached to a wall. I do have an upcoming project that I do have this wallpaper in mind for, and so I'm not going to talk about it right now. It will hopefully be before the end of the year, so this wall will not be made in vain. It will definitely end up in a project, and the gray actually I think will blend really nicely with another item that I need in that project. I'm using Mod Podge like I usually do for wallpaper. I like to lay it down nice and thin with a brush and then lay the wallpaper on top of it. I'm also using a brayer. I think that's what this is called. I just happened to have one accidentally. I don't know where it came from, but that helps flatten it out into the Mod Podge. And then I also always put a heavy book on top of a wall, if possible, if it's not connected to something, to let it dry. So like I said, I'm not really sure if the spray helped because it did turn out really nice and flat, but it may have also been the process I always usually walk through also made it nice and flat. So once I was thinking about the wallpaper, I couldn't help but think about maybe using this with fabric, and I thought I was so smart and pre-ordered some fabric online that can go through the printer, but what I got was canvas. And when they say canvas, they literally mean canvas, like painting on canvas. It was very thick, it didn't bend very well, and so there was no way I was going to be able to use this like fabric. So I begrudgingly, if I can say that word, begrudgingly got in my car, went to the craft store and found some actual computer printer fabric, and it was so much better. It's actually fabric, not canvas. And I'm a little apprehensive about this. I really didn't know how this would turn out, but holding it in my hands, I could already tell it was a much better option than the canvas. It has like a sticker on the back and then the fabric on the front. So I'm kind of wondering if you could make your own version of this. I don't really know. I wouldn't be sure how to do that, but I was willing to give it a try. And you can see how thin it is. You can see the paper showing through the fabric. I went back into my program because I wanted to make a few changes to really test how well this fabric prints. And if I'm making my own wallpaper and my own fabric pieces to match, I want to know how small the details can get on the fabric before it just becomes a complete mess. Another reason I'm making so many different test prints on one sheet is because each one of these fabric sheets is about $1.70, which is pretty expensive in my book. You only get 10 sheets for $17, and so I want to do as many tests as I can on one sheet before it goes through the printer, because then I only have 9 left. And so I want to see all my patterns come out before I decide what I want to do. And to be completely honest, I was incredibly impressed. The detail is so fine on this, and partially that has to do with the DPI being at 600, but I was sure that there was going to be some bleeding or some smudginess because this is printer ink and it says to set your printer just like normal paper. I couldn't figure out how that was going to work or how that was going to come out well, but it did. Like the printer was like, sure, yeah, this is paper, let's print it just fine with the same settings, and it did great. Also, the directions say to heat set it. I imagine this is if you're going to be washing your project at some point, if you're making clothing. I'm not, so I skipped that step. I also kind of wanted to test and see if I did get any runs, any ink runs while I was working with it. This is something I will be more concerned with in the future if I want to do a full thing of drapes where I like to put it in the water glue solution to make drapes. Right now I'm going to be using the hot glue gun and it worked just fine. So if you do want to use water at some point, you probably need to do the heat set part. But for now I'm just kind of skipping that and we'll see how well it does. So now I'm cutting it into different pieces just to kind of get a feel for what I have. And of course I have to make some kind of miniature with this. So I found this old set of 2 chairs and a table. One of the table legs had fallen off. I think I had put the other 2 chairs in a project at some point, so they just really didn't have a home, and I thought maybe I could turn these into something else simply by upholstering the chair, and I'm going to put a little table skirt that goes all the way around the table. The first thing I'm doing is prying off these previously upholstered pieces, and I was going to try and save them, but I just couldn't, and I knew that that fabric was so thin you would see the flowers through the fabric. So I recut the same shapes out of mat board and made sure that they fit on the chair. Now I'm going to upholster them with some quilt blanket batting, and to do this I'm just going to glue them down and then cut them out so that they're the same shape, and then I will glue them down again and then cut them out again, and that will result in 2 layers of quilt batting on top of each square. Once I'm happy with those, I can begin the process of recovering them with the fabric that I printed. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue, which I'm pretty new to, but I feel like it does a really good job. I mean, it's Fabri-Tac and I'm using fabric, so it did pretty well, and I don't feel like it went through the fabric like tacky glue can, especially on really thin fabrics. So I liked how this glue worked with this fabric and with the entire process of upholstering. Upholstering a single seat cushion is pretty easy. You basically just kind of fold it up like a present and work really hard to get those corners as tight as possible. And when I'm done, here I have one little cushion with the popcorn image in the middle of it. And I did one with the popcorn and one with the muffin, and here they are on the chairs. I don't have them attached yet because I thought I was going to like them on these kind of distressed chairs, but in the end I decided to repaint the chairs and make them a cream color, and if I decide to distress them in the future, I can distress the whole thing together instead of having the wood part distressed and the cushion looking nice and brand new. I'm putting these on with hot glue. I like to do these with hot glue because if I do decide to reupholster them in the future, it is easier to pop them off if they were originally glued with hot glue. The last thing I'm going to try to do with this fabric is make a little accordion fold skirt that goes around the table. In order to do this, I cut out the little circles in a straight line, and I'm attaching them together with some hot glue so that I have one straight line, basically a ribbon of fabric that I can accordion fold all around the table. I am using hot glue for this because it goes a little bit faster, and I feel if I'm careful enough I don't make too big of a mess. And I've done this before, but if I were doing drapes, like long complete drapes that would go from like the top of the wall to the bottom covering a window, I would definitely be using my draping method where I put it in the water and glue. So here's how it's looking. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the table. As you do notice, it does fray just like regular fabric. I am fraying it on purpose just a little bit because I want it to look like it's got a little bit of fringe at the bottom of the fabric. I probably should have done this before I put it around the entire table, but I like the little fringed look. Here is the table itself and the popcorn chair, and here it is compared to the original painting, which I think a lot of the details transferred into the fabric, which I'm super happy with, and I wasn't quite sure that was going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I am very happy with the result. I think this project has so many possibilities. I remember back when I was working on the Addams Family dolls, I could not find a pinstripe fabric that I wanted for Gomez's jacket. I couldn't find the delicately dark flowered fabric that I wanted for Wednesday, and I ended up having to hand make those items. So I think for this to actually work and have a lot of details can open up so many more possibilities in projects where we as miniaturists have something specific in mind but can't find it in our scale. Now it's time for my absolute favorite part of the prompt videos, where I get to show what you all have made. Most of these are from prompt number 10, radio. There are a few others mixed in. I always try my best to make sure I get everybody's prompts in the video, but if you do ever find that I miss your prompt, please email me, send me a message, let me know, and it will always be in the next video. Thank you to everyone who participates these. I think it's so inspiring to see what you all are making, and it definitely inspires me to keep going. Don't forget to check out Sean's channel. He also made something based off of the prompt word popcorn. I think you all will really love it. His link is in the description box below this video, below the title. You can click on that and go over and see his video. If you would like to participate in prompt number 11 popcorn, make sure to tag your post on Instagram with hashtag Bentley House Prompts, or you can share on my Facebook page, which is called Bentley House Minis. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. The things you are going to want to make sure of.